They walked up to the cart and Marco slammed his open palm on the side of it twice. The cart lurched forward and it started off down towards the bridge, being pulled by three of the apprentices, all huffing under the weight of what they were pulling. They'd be glad when the trip was over and the cart was considerably lighter for their return trip. Samuel and Marco walked in step with the apprentices, making sure they weren't working too hard and keeping an eye on the direction of the cart, spotting a loose stone or hole that would cause them some trouble if they were to hit it. They made their way through the burgeoning crowds as they got closer to the center. A short while later, they made it to the festival stage and pulled the cart around to the back of it and began to unload the weapons and supply sacks filled with provisions from various stalls all around the market onto the stage. There were rows of tables along the length of the stage where weapons were laid out, and the sacks of supplies were organized by the animal that was destined to carry them to make it easier for Father Jedediah to direct the flow of the children to collect what they needed for the journey ahead of them. He always led the festival ceremony and made sure that everyone knew what was going to happen to the children and what a special occasion this was. Samuel helped load the sacks onto the stage, wary to stay away from the oiled weapons as his father had instructed. It was quick work. There were only a dozen animals to be called up on stage, and while the number was small, there was going to be plenty of time for each of the animals to take their pick of weaponry. He could see the weapons being laid out on the tables for the middling crowd of onlookers to see: swords and daggers, staves, and the occasional bow and sets of arrows, and the larger, more menacing weapons for the badgers, the flail and greatsword, designed to utilize their greater strength. He had helped make parts for all of them, from the arrow tips to the staff with reinforced ends to the blades and balls on chain within the flails themselves. He was proud of his work and knew that each of those weapons had been tested and retested again and again before being approved to give each of the students passing alone the stage. Not a single animal there was ever going to need another weapon as long as they lived, as long as they were taken care of, that was, with proper honing and sharpening as needed. He thought fondly of the hours he had spent sharpening the tools for his classmates, and how for one particular mouse he had inscribed an R in the pressed metal tips of the staff she was bound to pick, and worked her name into the center of the metal handle with great care over a night's work once his father had gone to bed. Then he realized with great dismay that he hadn't told her that he'd personalized one for her, and made up his mind to do so. "Father, I've got to go to the baker's stall for a minute. There's something I've forgotten to do," said Samuel. Marco, knowing his impression of the baker's daughter he had on his son, smiled and said, "Sure thing. Make sure she knows which one is hers. You wouldn't want Rose's staff going to someone else, now would you? We'll be fine here without you. Go on," said Marco. Samuel smiled and made his way across the market to the stall. When he got there, he was dismayed to find that it had already closed up, but that he could see Janice talking with Rose and Averly, handing Averly a small bundle of something that could only be food and pointing in the direction of the stage, obviously telling them to go over there to the stage to get ready before the crowd set in and they couldn't make it through. He caught up with Rose and Averly just as they turned to leave the stall. "Rose, I need to tell you something," said Samuel. "Oh? What is that?" asked Rose. He blushed and stammered a little. I know you wanted a staff for your weapons choice, so I made sure to make you one especially," said Samuel. "You didn't! How did you know that I wanted a staff and not a blade like most mice?" asked Rose. "You've mentioned many times how you would rather have a staff that was as long as you were tall and as thick as your wrist, so you could swing it with great force needed, or use it to jump over a large rock if it got in your way instead of having to climb over it," said Samuel. "I wanted to tell you that yours is special. Most of the staffs are silver in color, but yours is a brushed rose gold, and I inscribed your name along the length of the handle in the middle, so you always knew which weapon was yours. It's my gift to you," said Samuel, and he blushed again, smiling at her. She smiled back. "You really did that for me?" Rose exclaimed excitedly. "That's so nice of you. You didn't have to do all that. How will I make sure that I get the right staff when we're up there? You're just going to have to make sure you're first." I had the apprentices wrap it in the middle of the set of small staffs, and it's slightly taller than all the others, and a different color, so it shouldn't be too hard to see which was which, even with the lights on the stage on," said Samuel. "Oh, thank you, Sam," said Rose. "Thank you so much." "It's no problem. Anything for a good friend," said Samuel, blushing again. They stared at one another until Averly caught Samuel's eye. Realizing he was being impolite, Samuel took the time to introduce himself to Averly, and she did the same. Rose and Samuel stared at each other for a while in quiet admiration until Avery said, "Are you ready to get going? We've only got a couple of hours before the ceremony starts. Is there anything else we need to do before heading over?" Rose thought to herself for a minute and said, "Parkland! We have to go and check on him. He's probably fallen asleep, the silly badger, and we don't want him missing his time at the ceremony." So they gathered their things, and the three of them then headed off to the tavern. On the way, Rose and Averly told Samuel of how they met. "You grabbed her foot?" asked Samuel. "I didn't mean to. I was looking for my coin," said Averly, laughing. It was just a small furry patch I felt that squeaked when I squeezed it. It wasn't what I was looking for at all, but I'm glad I did." We've spent all day with one another, and it's been just wonderful. It's been ages since I could say I've made a friend." She looked over at Rose. "We are friends, aren't we?" "Oh, yes," said Rose. "Of course we are. You can't start off a friendship any better way than through a hilarious misunderstanding like that, now can you?" Avery smiled to herself and thought, maybe we ought to make some more friends than these two as well. It filled her with a sense of warmth that she's not used to, and made her feel slightly giddy at the prospect. It was at that point that she decided she would ask to join them on their quest out of town in the morning. "Maybe they'll let me come along and we can keep being friends," she thought. It pleased her to no end as they walked along the promenade. They made their way down the river bank and up the hill towards to the heaven, to where they could see the old oak tree sitting against the dusk. They moved along at a quickened pace, and Averly made sure not to trip along with her bundle of food. She'd been eating it later on, she thought. They came to the great root doors of the tavern and pushed their way inside. It was busy in the tavern. All sorts of animals were in the foyer. Many were eating, some were reading, others were playing cards and discussing the festival with each other. A few of the older patrons were sleeping soundly in the overstuffed chairs by the unlit fireplaces. Not that you could hear their snores over the cacophony of the interaction. Lizzie and a few toads ran from table to table, dropping off food and drink to the clients, laughing and smiling to everyone around them. They moved with great accuracy between the slow-moving patrons with years of experience guiding their movements. Not a single tray was unleveled while they whipped and spun between the groups of animals and their activities. Lizzie brought the table nearest the children, a white hare with a great bushy mustache, a plate of summer greens, and a mug of ale, and after dropping them off to the patrons, smiled at the three children waiting for them there. "You must be here for Barky," said Lizzie. "He's up in his room at the moment, probably sleeping off one of his daydreams. Why don't you go up and see him and see if you can get him up for the ceremony? I've got my paws full, and his father's busy in the kitchen at the moment." They made their way through the throng of animals, taking their leisure at the tavern and over to the stairs. As they passed by the stage, they noticed the minstrels singing and playing music for the crowd. A mouse with a lute and a sweet voice was singing a summer song and being backed by a group of dancing otters and rabbits to each side of her. "Oh, come away, to the misty isle of Summerfall, a wonderful land of ancient magic and a great place to summer well." It quieted as they made their way up the stairs, though the stairwell dampened most of the noise. Every time someone passed by, the opening snippets of conversation would carry up the stairwell behind them, and they got sections of convoluted conversation until they reached the third floor, where it quieted completely. The tree was thick, which gave the walls ample ability to deaden sound, which made for a wonderful stay at the guests of the tavern. They made their way up the stairwell to the bedrooms of the Badger's private floor. It stretched out over multiple branches and gave the best views of the town from their vantage point. Samuel knocked on the door, and after hearing no return, went inside. The Badger's living space was large, as it would need to be to house badgers of such size. They had remodeled the multiple floors of the Toad's levels into a large living area with a hearth and access to the heat from down below. A wonderfully quaint kitchen if they didn't want to cook down on the main floor, and 4 large bedrooms. One, a study for Blake and Lizzie to take care of the business side of the tavern. A guest room suitable to house a badger or a family of small mice, as they've liked to do from time to time, and 2 bedrooms of the Badger family themselves. They walked down the hallway to the bedrooms and turned to the right, Barkland's door being shut, knocked on it and asked if he was up. Barkland woke quickly when he heard his name being called by 3 voices from the other side of his door. He wasn't sure why they were calling with so many voices calling for him, but he stretched and got out of bed. I'm up, said Barkland groggily. "Let me wash my face so I can wake up a bit." The door opened and Barkland came lumbering out half asleep. He made his way to the bathroom and went inside. Running water could be heard as he turned the tap on, and water splashed as he washed the sleep from his eyes and freshened up. He came back out and stood in the hallway to greet his guests. "Oh, hi, Sam and Rose," said Barkland. "Who's your new wolfie friend?" Barkland yawned. "Oh, this is Averly," said Samuel. "Her and Rose have become fast friends over the course of the day, since this morning's little adventure. They'll fill you in on that later." "Pleasure to meet you, Averly," said Barkland, holding out his massive paw towards the young wolf. Averly took his paw and shook it congenially. "Pleasure to meet you, too," replied Averly. "We've come to get you up in time for the ceremony tonight," said Rose. "We didn't want you to risk you sleeping through it." "That's very nice of you," said Barkland. "I wouldn't have wanted to been able to get myself up in time to get to the stage without your help. Thanks for checking on me. Was having the most wonderful dream about a waterfall. You were there too, Rose and Samuel. And I think you may have been there too, Averly, now that I think about it. We were standing at this great free-falling waterfall by the edge of a river's cliff, and then you woke me up." And he laughed himself gently. It echoed slightly into the large room. "Before we get going, I need to grab something from my room. Would you mind?" asked Barkland. They didn't, and followed him back into his room. The 3 of them sat on his bed and stared out across the room through the window to the dusk falling on the town. The shadow cast where the tree fell across multiple buildings and reached most of all the way to the market in the burning light of the sun. Parkland grabbed his book satchel and tied it around his shoulders. There we go. That's what I need to get before we left. I have to make sure that if it works with what I'm carrying, and I don't want it to pick a weapon that won't work with it, said Parkland. You still haven't figured out what you want yet? Asked Haverly. No, not yet. I figure I'll know what I want when I get there. It's not like it's going to be stressful or anything, having to pick our weapons in front of the whole town, joked Parkland. Of course not, you silly badger, replied Averly, laughing. Parkland and Averly smiled at one another and laughed. Then they were all laughing. Once the giggles quieted down, Parkland got ready to go and they started heading out from his bedroom. They made their way through the badger-sized living room, and the three smaller animals and Parkland went out into the stairwell. Parkland closed the door behind him and pulled a great silver key from his pocket and locked the door. Then he put the key back in his pocket and said, Okay, I'm ready for this. Let's get on down to the ceremony and go and get on an adventure started. They were all excited to get down there as well and agreed. They made their way down the stairs, and Parkland stopped off at his mother as she was pouring ale into a set of mugs and setting them on the tray at the bar in front of the kitchen. We're off, Mother, said Parkland, and she gave him a hug and told him she loved him and good luck with the ceremony. He went into the back of the kitchen and told his father much the same and got a similar response. Then he met his three friends and they were out through the still busy tavern and headed off towards the market square, relishing the cooling night air that passed over the river and swept by them as they followed back into the center of town. They arrived just as the last of the weaponry and supply sacks were being unloaded onto the stage, and the weary apprentices started to pull the old cart around from the back of the stage to the waiting area to sit until after the ceremony was over. A great bell had also been placed at the corner of the front of the stage, where Father Jedediah would be standing while giving his speech, as well as when he rang the bell to signify the start and end of the ceremony. He was nowhere to be seen, as he was likely resting for the speech he was going to give that night. Looks like Dad and the fellows are done with for the meantime, said Samuel. We should go and get close to the stage so that when the bell rings we'll be able to get Rose on stage first so she can get her staff, said Samuel, smiling at Rose. Rose looked at him and said, Yes, that would be best, I think. If we can get in line together, then we should be able to get through the ceremony and get back home after the party finishes quickly enough. In front of the stage were rows of long plank tables and bench seats. As when the party started, the animals in attendance could sit with one another, and the children going on their adventure could be commended and given advice from the adults in the crowd. A long green carpet had been rolled out between the two rows of tables, and at the end of the large area had been sectioned off to allow the families of those making the journey to deposit their children in the right area before the ceremony began. They made their way to the designated waiting section. When they arrived, they could just make out the front of the stage from the vantage point from the waiting area, as the view was obstructed by the tables and the milling crowd and the partitions to each side of the stage and the tables. To their dismay, they could see that the line was already populated by some animals that had the same idea as they did of getting there early to make sure they got up on stage together. 2 hares, an otter, and a mouse were already waiting at the front of the line. They were discussing the weapons they were going to pick. An otter named Joseph said, I want a bow and arrows myself. I wouldn't want to get close to anything that could harm me, and I could stalk my prey in the water and trees before they could even see me. He smiled to himself with the thought about how he could stalk his enemy out of the water's bow and paw. The hares, twin brothers named Bernard and Steiner, were both talking at once, completing each other's sentences as though they were of a single mouth. We were thinking of getting, said Bernard, swords ourselves. The bows and arrows seem great and all, but there's nothing like being able to, said Steiner, fell a foe at close range with your own strength doing the damage, finished Bernard. They continued on like that for the whole conversation. The mouse, a relatively large gray field mouse named Topher, held out its paws and said, I think I've got you all beat. I'm going to get a staff myself, something that can do damage as a paw-to-paw weapon or be used as a formidable projectile if needs be. Only once, said Joseph, smirking. What were you going to do then? He asked the mouse. Topher squeezed his palms together and raised them menacingly, said, Then I'll fight them with these, my fists. His friends all stared at him and started to laugh. His fists, he says Steiner. Might as well be his feet, too, guffawed Bernard. I'll use those too if I have to, said Topher. Stop making fun of me. I'm a formidable warrior, I am. The three friends erupted in laughter again. Wiping tears away from his eyes, Joseph said, Oh yes, yes you are, the mighty Topher, the great slayer of Mistlehop. I will be a great warrior, said Topher to himself, pouting. They patted him on the back and assured him that they were only fooling, and that he would be a great warrior someday. The group got in line behind them, and Rose's panic couldn't be withheld. "Did you hear that? Topher wants a staff just like me," said Rose. The concern brought the end of her sentence up a register at the end. "What if he picks my staff by mistake because it's prettier than all the others?" she asked. But her fears were calmed by the mouse's sudden change of heart. "Maybe I'll not go with a staff then. Maybe I'll go with a sword or bow and arrows like you guys," offered Topher. "I can see how they'd be better weapons in a close firefight, while I would be stuck in the middle trying to get into or away from the onslaught." The others agreed with him, and he smiled. "Or maybe a mace," squeaked the mouse. This brought a whole set of laughter from his friends as they assured him he was too small for a mace to be useful. He pouted again and sulked in the line. "I'll just get a plain old sword then," said Topher. "There's nothing plain about our swords," thought Samuel, but kept that to himself. He was annoyed that they weren't first in line and that he could have almost lost the staff he put so much work into for Rose to that field mouse. He would not have been happy if that had happened, and was gladdened by the indecisive change of heart Topher had, as well as slightly dismayed that his friends would pick him like that about wanting something a little different. "I'm glad my friends aren't like that," Samuel thought to himself. They waited in line until it started to get dark. The crowds were piling in now, with the most esteemed members of the community sitting at every chair available at each table except for the empty seats designated for Jedediah and the children who were sitting to go up on stage for the ceremony at the front of the 2 rows. The other members started to trickle in behind them until all 12 of the current ceremony goers were there. They were all nervous, and some fidgeted from foot to foot while they waited. Avery stood in the crowd next to the 3 of them in line. She was amazed by the number of animals that were there. All its support for such a small number made her feel slightly small and a little lonely, but she was also glad that her new friends got to do something so interestingly. So, as the sky started to darken, lamps were lit along the periphery of the tables and around the stage and along the walls of the square itself. Moths flapped lazily towards and away from the tiny fires, circling their little caverns of light. Suddenly the bell struck twice, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. There was Jedediah on stage, smiling. The bell was struck a 3rd time, and he made his way down the green walkway to where the children were waiting, and beaming at him, leaned in and said, "Are you ready, young ones, to start your adventures as life as adults?" Please visit anchor.fm/divergentmind to leave a message so that I may get back to you. Thank you. Have a nice day.